morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to the virtual worship experience of the Kingdom Fellowship Baptist Church, located at 3530, my goodness, I can't even talk today, located at 3735 North Tresman Street in the great hamlet of Fraser, in the great city of Memphis, in the great state of Tennessee. It happens, we freeze up, people. Sometimes when it happens, they edit that out. But, let folks see the real. People flub, make mistakes. Broadcasters do it all the time. Sometimes we get a chance to see it live. So you got a chance to see me do it. Okay. Moving right along. Glad to be before you in this space. Excuse me. Glad to be before you in this way. God has yet been good, and I appreciate what the Lord has done. One day I will probably talk about one of the things that happened to me this year, but God brought me out. And so every day, in a sense, is a celebration of what God has done in the midst of my experience. God is not just not just. God is not a figurehead. God is not a concept, but God is real. There is a light joke in the midst of our black church community, but it's really not a joke when you hear it. And mostly older folks say, the younger folk, I don't know if they do it now. Somebody will say, the Lord, he are good. Now, we know that's not proper English. But we say the Lord, he are good. Then the person hearing it a lot of times will respond, yes, he are. Now, what does that mean besides the fact that we purposely hijacked the King's English? It means that God is beyond just being proper to us. But God is personal. When you say the Lord, when you know better, but you say the Lord, he are good, you're trying to say that he's gooder than good, that he's better than best, that he's been close to you, that he's done some stuff for you. He's brought you through some things. So that's what that means. The Lord, he are good. And then when the other person answers, some persons will just say, yes, he is. They'll know what you're saying. But when you really know what's said, you're going to answer one of two ways. Yes, he are, or yes, he be. Because you're trying to say that I feel you. I know what you're saying. And he's been that good to me. And somebody at the house right now, you're talking back to me. You're like, yes, he are. And you're waving at the monitor. And you're having an experience because when you start thinking about the Lord, and when you start thinking about how good God has been, you can't help the emotions start to stir, because when you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, let me put you like this. I still kind of do it, but not like in the beginning. When I first met my wife, I was telling everybody that knew me. I met this woman and started talking about her. Matter of fact, I have a lot of friends outside of this area, so I remember when I sent them an email. And I think this was right around the time we got engaged. And I put a picture in it. And I started talking about it. It was a picture I took. I told everybody. And we had a big wedding, and folk came from a whole bunch of places. Because I was happy, still happy, after 23 years, still happy to be in a relationship with this woman. So now multiply that by what God has meant in my life, what God has meant in your life. And think about the joy that God has given you in the midst of your life. I still brag on her. It's a little different now because I really know her now. So I still brag on her. I tell people all the time, she's the better half, she's the smarter half of us. Do that all the time. But that just goes to show you when you're in relationship, especially relationship with God, and you think about all the things that God does for you, you can't help but get excited. All right, let's go to our scripture. I'm getting ready to wax eloquent on that, but I don't want to start bragging. I could, but I won't. Let's go to our scripture. Luke 24, verses 13 through 35. And it says, now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleophas, asked him, are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened there in these days? What things? He asked. About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. He said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, stay with us, for it's nearly evening, the day is almost over. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us when he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, it is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon. Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. All right, we now find ourselves the week after Easter. And for our text, it's the day after Easter. And so, for a subject, put up the wrong one. Bear with me, y'all. This must be glitch day. There we go. At least you know this is not fake. But anyway, for our subject today, want to deal with this. God-induced blindness. God-induced blindness. God-induced blindness. Now, we're in our text. we're in the afternoon of Resurrection Sunday. The text says, now that same day, it's alluding to what happened at the empty tomb. And it says, now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. So they were taking roughly a half a day's journey. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other. And so they're walking to Emmaus, as the text tells us. Why are they walking and getting away? They're getting away from the heat of the action. They were leaving Jerusalem. They were talking about the amazing things that they had seen. And they're trying to make sense of it. And if they were talking, perhaps, and the text alludes to this, how Jesus was railroaded and set up by his own people to be crucified. And so all of their emotions were commingling, and they probably felt the same way that someone does after getting robbed. Something about getting robbed. Some of you have gone through it. It's a personal violation. And it can affect you for life. Someone comes in your home and ransacks it and takes stuff out of it. It affects your sense of security. Somebody, if you're on public transport, gets you to a place and robs you. Somebody knocks you in the head in the street. Somebody carjacks you. It creates emotions. And so these are some of the things that was going on in their head. But now I want you to notice, and I'm just going to walk through the text and get out your way. I want you to notice something. They're having this two-man conversation, and all of a sudden Jesus walks up. And Jesus hears them talking and just asks them, what are y'all talking about? And one of them says, wait a minute, brother, have you not been paying attention? You're walking from Jerusalem like us. We know you have seen or heard what had happened in these days. And if you get a simple Bible dictionary, it will show you that Golgotha, the place of the skull, Calvary, was just outside the city gate. And so all of those in Jerusalem were able to take a very short walk and go to this public place to see where Jesus was crucified. And so here it is. They start having conversation about some of the things that have happened. And then it gave Jesus an opportunity to teach. Because some of the things that they were talking about were absolutely correct, because these are the things that happened. But some of the perceptions were not on target. And so the text tells us early, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. Why did the Lord do that? It would have been great for Jesus just to say, y'all, I'm back, and let's rejoice. But Jesus said, no, I need to step back. And so this was a case of God-induced blindness. Now, the Lord, if you want to know the truth of the matter, will often do this in our life. God will give us directions. And we won't be able to see why until after we've been obedient and maybe some time has passed. And then God will allow us to see the why. Sometimes God never allows us to see the why, but God knows why God does certain things. I want you to walk with me through several scenarios as to why I believe the Lord induced blindness on these two brothers. And it wasn't the blindness where they couldn't see at all, but they were not allowed to recognize that Jesus was among them. So it was a layer of spiritual blindness, if you were. Not the type where they were unwilling to see, but God said, right now, or Jesus said, right now, I need to pull back a little bit. First of all, consider this. They had been through trauma. Those in Jerusalem that finally got Jesus were probably also looking for the disciples and saying, while we have him, we need to go ahead and get rid of them. And it was so serious that when Peter told Jesus, I would never deny you, and Jesus said, before the cock crows, you'll deny me 3 times. And so Peter was bolder than the rest of the disciples and went to the hearings when they were going after Jesus. And he denied Jesus 3 times. And at the 3rd time, Jesus turned and looked at him. And Peter went away weeping. So think about it. They were in an environment where they were hiding, where they were despondent. Their leader was gone. And so it affected them. And so Jesus perhaps understood that they needed to get this out and talk to somebody about what had taken place. Because you notice they freely had conversation about Jesus. And something within them felt that they could trust Jesus, even though they didn't know it was Jesus. And so they had to get it out. And sometimes God will send some folk. Now, notice what I said. Not those people that are normally all in your business. Because there are some people that will take your business and tell your business more than they'll tell their business. I'm not talking about them. But sometimes God sends some people in your life that will help lift you up. And so Jesus was listening to them, even as they shared out of their pain. I remember particular incidents. I was up for a position out of town. And it was to the point where it looked like a done deal. Some of my friends that may watch this know exactly what I'm talking about. Matter of fact, one person who's steeped in the church sent a message to another friend and said, tell your wife to start looking at houses because it's about to happen. Everybody in the know just saw me going to this location. What happened? It didn't happen. They went in the direction of someone with no pastoral experience. I was hurt. And I remember I sat in the house of Dr. Gardner C. Taylor. And I remember I was telling him, and he probably knew exactly what had happened. Because you know the church community, when you get to certain levels, is small. And we were talking, and I think I vented for about 15 minutes. He didn't say a word. And when I got through, he looked at me. He had a whimsical way. He looked at me, had a half grin on his face, and said, congratulations. And he and I laughed for about 5 minutes. And that took all of the pain away from me. And I was able to let go of that and move on. And sometimes God knows that's what you need. And so Jesus did that for them. But then secondly, I want you to see something. They were with Jesus for 3 years. But in verse 21, Cleophas said, but we had hoped he was the one that was going to redeem Israel. Now, that would have been nice for Jesus to get the Roman Empire off Israel's back. Because as some of you know, the Romans actually had the power and the execution to crucify Jesus. The chief priests and elders couldn't do it. And so they were under the thumb of the Roman Empire. And they looked forward to the day where they could redeem and have their own nation back again. But if that's all that Jesus came to do, those of us who are not of the Jewish nation would be still lost. But the Bible tells us plainly, and Jesus said these words, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. So he came for us. But Jesus took the time as he walked with them. And our text says, starting with Moses and the prophets, and walked them through what Jesus actually came here to do. Sometimes God will allow us not to see the full picture so that God can show us the full picture. I think the best example of that is what we're dealing with now as a nation. There were those who told us that we were going to have a topsy-turvy reality. And to tell the truth, it just started. We were told what Trump was going to do with these tariffs. People didn't believe it. Trump's first term, he showed who he was. People didn't believe it. Those of us of a certain age from New York, I'm one of them, told people, you do not want him as your president. They didn't believe it. And so now you would think after he already had a term that we wouldn't have to resurface this insanity. But people just knew he was going to correct things. And by the way, the things that they wanted corrected didn't really need correction. But they bought into the hype. And now they see what people have been trying to tell them. Sometimes we don't think that fat meat is greasy. So sometimes we have to eat it and see it to understand that it's not the best thing for you. And so sometimes you have to be led to where you should go. And when we tried to lead you away from this disaster, you didn't want to be led. And so here we are. But God a lot of times will lead you to where you should go. But then also, I'm convinced that God does this to protect us from ourselves. What would have happened if he had revealed himself on the road? And you got to understand that when you do the research on Jesus, the historical Jesus, he doesn't look like what we see in Western eyes, this Italian model that they've shaped him to be. Isaiah said he had no comeliness about him. He was just average Joe. but it was the words, it was the presence. And he was Afro-Asiatic, so he was a brother. I'm not adding to what's in the scripture. He was a brother. So now imagine what would have happened if he had revealed himself. He'd be like the graduations that we're about to see all over the country. When our loved one walks across the stage and somebody hollers from the back, "Thank you, Jesus." And sometimes we try to get the people to be quiet because we feel that it's taken away from the dignity of the hour. But if you've been black for a certain length of time, you understand why sometimes people break protocol. Could have been an old grandmother that did all kind of things, scrubbed all kind of floors, worked in the Memphis hub, did all kind of stuff to get this money up for this boy to graduate. Know some of the challenges they went through to graduate. I think of an interview I watched recently when Penny Hardaway was on The Pivot. It's a YouTube show with Ryan Clark. And he talked about coming up in Memphis. And he talked about the sacrifices of his grandmother. And he talked about that's where his work ethic came from. And he talked about feeling an obligation to her to stay in Memphis. And he talked about all of that. So when you have somebody that's been there and wrestled with you and for you, and then they see you walk across the stage, I can imagine when his grandmother saw him become the ball player he was and the person he became, what it did to her on the inside. And so when you see stuff like that, you can't help but shout when you see it come to its conclusion. And so what do you think would have happened had these two disciples, even out in the open, realized that it was Jesus talking to them? They would have had church service right there. They would have been shouting right there. They'd have had to stop in the middle of the road and get their dance on right there if they had realized that it was Jesus. And so Jesus was saying, no, we don't need to do it like that. We need to take them where they're going so that when I reveal myself, they can go and then tell the other brothers that they saw me. But then here's the final thing. It caused them, when Jesus finally revealed himself to one, go back to Jerusalem. So in other words, you can't hide. You know the truth. You need to tell your brothers. You can't hide. You got to be witness to the truth. Go back to Jerusalem. And it causes you to reflect on your journey. Did not our hearts burn when he was talking to us on the road? I'm going to end with this. This is personal. When I graduated from high school, I'm a Baptist preacher, I know. But when I grew up, I was Episcopalian. I knew the church, but I didn't know him. I didn't know Jesus. And that's not casting an aspersion on the Episcopal Church. It's talking about where I was. And I was in church every Sunday. But I couldn't wait because I had a strong mother. And I couldn't wait to go to college so I wouldn't have to fool with church no more. I had made up my mind me and church were going to be separated. So I get to college. But then I saw this girl. Now, let me pause. You know, there's always a woman involved in some ways when you're starting to go left, but just keep listening. Saw this girl arrested my attention. She was an upperclassman. I didn't care, I was a freshman. So I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to say to get her attention? So I came up with something. So we were standing together, and I walked up to her right around that time. I said, "Excuse me." I said, "I play a little piano." Yeah, I should have said a little. But anyway, I played a little piano, and I was wondering, is there anywhere around here where a brother could, like, practice so he can keep his chops up? So she got excited. I started rubbing my hands together in my head. She said, "Well, first of all, you're standing in front of the music recital hall, and any student can go in here and utilize the pianos." So I say, "Yeah, I'm going to say, do you want to hear me play?" I was plotting what I was going to do next. But then she said, "And the gospel choir needs a piano player." Now, let me explain the scenario. I was in a school where there wasn't a lot of black students, so I wasn't going to be able to hide from her after I made this declaration. So I had to eventually show up to the rehearsal. The choir was in a bad state of affairs. And then we had a Protestant chaplain. We had one, he left at the end of that year, and we got another one. And they started talking about a relationship with Jesus Christ. Make a long story short, not only did I come back to church, I gave my life to the Lord during the summer when we were out of school, and came back, and then the whole responsibility of the choir fell in my lap. And the choir at that time was dysfunctional. It had no rhyme or reason. And the Lord made it so that I was over it. I pondered many a year as to how that happened, why that happened, and the Lord showed me bits and pieces. And then I pondered later, how did I wind up in Memphis? Because I had no desire, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, but when I was looking at places to move from Brooklyn, Memphis was not on the radar at all. But I wound up here. But I want to show you the sense of humor that God has. And God will blind you to some stuff. I was sitting one day, in the house, and it came to me. That girl I was trying to wink at, I found out 2 weeks later she had a boyfriend. And the two of them were like this. And it turns out we became good friends, and I kind of fell out of touch with her. I'm going to try to reconnect with her, just because she was my college classmate. And I was cool with him. He was good people. Matter of fact, 3 years later, we recorded an album. She and I sang a duet on the album. So we all became like this. But the Lord showed me something. I want y'all to guess where her boyfriend was from. And it didn't click until about maybe 5 years ago. That's right. He was from Memphis. And when I pondered that thing, it was as if the Lord was saying to me, you were trying to run. You had a design for your life, but I knew all along where I was going to lead you. And I was telegraphing it, but you had God-induced blindness, so you couldn't fully see it at the time. But I set up and orchestrated all of that. And God will do that in your life, to shape your life in such fashion that you have to trust him. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Proverbs chapter 3. I know I talked longer than usual, but I hope this has blessed you, especially when I went back down memory lane. That thing spooked me when Lord started showing me how all this stuff connects. God sometimes won't let you see the full picture, but God has the whole picture in his hands. Thank you for being with us. I pray we blessed you. I pray you were strengthened for the journey. Until next time, God bless.